Hey friends. So I had some thoughts come to me recently, and I believe I've actually done a video post on this topic before a while ago. But loosely put, it takes me back to my days of being an avid reader of philosophy and ultimately some psychology literature, and the phase of my life when I was really deeply involved in the study of the human mind and kind of investigating the great thinkers who have explored that territory. And I was reminded of something in the Redbook by Carl Jung, which, if you don't know what the Redbook is Carl Jung's first transcription of research that he did that he called active imagination, where he would go into a dark room and sit and do these active, sort of meditative, immersive, epic, essentially sort of shamanic journeys, but without any chemical provocation. And then he would write down. He would basically just recount the events that he experienced. And I mean, we're talking like deep archetypal stuff. This is where he sort of formed his theories of how the subconscious is populated by archetypes, and how we ultimately are living out the effects of the archetypes we've embraced, and how by becoming conscious of that we can start to change things. We can start to evolve ourselves. We can start to change things for the better. But he goes into these just fantastic, I mean, it's like reading an epic fantasy film screenplay or something like that. Totally remarkable. I have the Redbook. I'm looking at the Redbook right over here on my counter. And so one of the ongoing dialogues that he has in this book, there are a number of chapters, and the episodes are loosely linked, but they also sort of function independently. So one of the ongoing dialogues that recurs is a dialogue between the protagonist, who's loosely held to be, the personality of Carl Jung, but also is not. It's kind of like the avatar that we assume in a dream, where it's us, but it's not really us, right? Like it can be out. We feel the sense of identity with the consciousness in the dream, the character walking around in a dream, but it's not our real life. It's somebody else. That's vaguely sort of how I perceive the protagonist in Carl Jung's Redbook. But that character has these series of encounters and series of dialogues with, there's a serpent that keeps coming back. There's actually the devil. He has dialogue with the devil. Fascinating. And he has dialogue with a variety of spirits. The two primary ones being the spirit of what he calls the spirit of the times, on the one hand, which is basically the spirit of contemporary culture, the spirit of now, of the zeitgeist. What's happening in the collective unconscious is the spirit of the times. And the spirit of the times is always shifting, always morphing. It's inconsistent. It'll say one thing one day and another thing the next day, because it's the spirit of the times. It literally is just a reflection of where the collective unconscious is at a given moment in time. And he has a variety of thing of episodes that happen in dialogue with this spirit. Then, so you got spirit of the times on the one hand, then you've got the spirit of the depths. And the spirit of the depths is almost like if we could imagine an embodiment of the unmanifest, never changing, eternal, always potent, always consistent, thoroughly present, and over the course of the book, over the course of the only loosely chronologically unfolding narrative, the protagonist sort of begins to weigh the input from each of these spirits. And ultimately, he sort of comes down on the side of, don't listen to the spirit of the times too much. Don't get too invested in what the spirit of the times is saying, because it's ultimately unreliable. Spirit of the depths is where our own soul connection can be found. It's where our essence will be reflected. It's where we can draw reliable, sustainable, bulletproof, ironclad protection, energy, inspiration. The spirit of the depths is where our true essence is. It's the still small voice inside of us that's speaking from beyond. And there's a kind of, there's an interesting dialogue that the protagonist also has with the devil, which also almost kind of mirrors that journey. But it's sort of a matter of you know, as a contemporary reader of this book from probably almost exactly 100 years ago, I forget, maybe a little more. Yeah, I think it was pre-World War I, so a little over 100 years ago. As a contemporary reader, we get to watch Carl Jung, the sort of proto-mind of Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychology pioneers in the world, develop his own perception of how his own mind works and what he's connected to. And the amazing thing about it is he wrestles with conundra that are thoroughly contemporary, because he was so way ahead of his time. He's wrestling with what I think we would call really kind of the postmodern predicament of relativism and the capacity to take multiple perspectives, and the fact that all perspectives are ultimately partial. There's no finally valid perspective, because a perspective is always manifest somehow, and that means we might have a hierarchy of perspectives where some perspectives include more than others, but there's no ultimately privileged perspective. Working that out, so if we enter that realm of what has been called postmodern relativism, how do we deal with that? How do we make good judgments? How do we make good decisions? How do we draw distinctions about what's good for us and what's bad for us, what's good and bad for society? You know, if we happen to be in a position where we have to make those kinds of decisions, how do we do that? If we're breaking away from a kind of very traditional hierarchical view of authority, and so Carl Jung is wrestling with this, you know, at the beginning of the 20th century, and now that's sort of I would say a pretty prevalent trend in contemporary living, in contemporary spiritual thinking, but this distinction between the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths is really what sort of flashed for me and then reminded me where reliable information or intelligence really resides. Because it's so easy to be pulled by the culture. It's so easy to be pulled by the way contemporary thinking is around a certain issue or, whatever. It's very difficult, actually, to be connected to the spirit of the times and not get pulled into a kind of short-term and ultimately kind of illusory sense of what's meaningful. But the spirit of the depths, if that's where we put our attention, if we can actually access that in some genuine, in some authentic way, it's not, it's not a stand-in. It's not just our own prejudices stepping in, pretending to be eternal principles. Then we've got a whole different platform for living. We've got a place that's rock solid, and we've got something to build on. We've got a foundation to build on. For some reason, I'm being drawn to quintal chords today. Chords that are all in fifths. Thanks, folks. Appreciate you. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.